uh, Professor of history, director of the European Institute at Columbia University, writing in foreign policy. The normal economy is never coming back. Adam Tooze, welcome back to the program.
Pleasure to be here.
So let's just, talk about, one of the things that has struck me and that has been sort of stunning is that there seems to be perhaps a lack of urgency amongst our lawmakers, and certainly sort of a general sense of a lack of awareness of the implications of what we're going through in the economy right now. And it seems to me a function of those trillions of dollars that the Fed pumped into the financial system and into the corporation, into the sort of, broadly speaking, corporate bailouts. So there seems to be sort of a lack of awareness of what's happening in, I don't know if you call that the real economy, but it feels like the real economy.
Yeah, I think that's about right. I mean, there's an extraordinary disconnect right now between financial markets, the stock market, the S&P 500, even more NASDAQ, and the unemployment numbers. What we're seeing out of the unemployment insurance registration systems of the states of the United States, all of them now, is quite simply the most severe economic shock that we've ever seen, including the 1930s, in the sense in which, in the space of 5 weeks, we've had 26 million Americans sign on for unemployment insurance. States like Michigan have seen a surge to what looks, on paper at least, like 25% unemployment in a single month. And on the other hand, as you're saying, really from the 23rd of March onwards, which was when the rally begins, the financial markets have been bobbing back, if not to their pre-crisis levels, then at least to much more buoyant levels. And what I think the difference maker here is definitely the Fed, which really from the beginning of March has been injecting more liquidity, more loans into the financial markets than ever before. So it's a very, very peculiar balance that we're seeing right now.
Yeah, I mean, it seems so. I keep likening it to a moment where like you bump into something and you're in a state of shock before, and you're suspended there for a moment and there's no reaction because you're still in a state of shock. I mean, is that what's going on, or is it that because the financial markets have been basically propped up, that nobody who usually cares about these things or ostensibly cares about these things are concerned? Like I'm having a real trouble wrapping my head around it. I mean, it would be hard to wrap my head around it if the stock market was also falling, right? I mean, but at least there would be some sort of like semblance of parity here. But we're going through something that is unprecedented, right?
Yeah, I do. I like your image. It's a bit of that, other cartoon images come to mind, like the Wile E. Coyote or something like that. That sense of having gone off the cliff, and there's that moment when the character is suspended in midair by nothing other than the spinning of their feet or their wheels or something. And then the plunge comes. And the question, of course, is when does that moment of plunge come? I mean, one way of making sense of this is that it's happening to different groups of people. I mean, one of the effects of the shock is, after all, to sort of divide us very starkly between those of us who have the privilege of being able to work from home. I work from home normally most of the time anyway. My life has been very little impacted by this. And I work for an employer with a big, deep endowment. Nothing is changing about my life very much other than my daughter's at home, so on and so forth, right? So it's personal circumstances. So my life continues onwards, and it's people who are in that fortunate position who, after all, are the people who own most of the equity in America's stock markets. And at the other hand, at the other end of the scale are the folks who work in the shops and the bodegas and the little restaurants that run up and down Broadway that I can see from outside my window. And they are locked away in small apartments in Queens, which is also where in New York City most of the infection is happening. And their reality is starkly different from mine. And the two don't really intersect in a direct way. I mean, I think as this goes on, we are going to be seeing not just middle class in the American sense, but upper middle class Americans losing their jobs, because this is going to become a comprehensive economic crisis. But the rate it's moving at right now is that the folks who've been laid off first are those at the bottom end of the labour market and those who are most vulnerable. And it's only really when this sort of seeps through to the entire economy that we're going to be, I think, seeing a more comprehensive shock. But I'm in the same state of bewilderment as you. You would expect an economy in this kind of paralysis to look different. I think part of the problem is that we can't, certainly in a city like in Manhattan, you can't go outside. So I mean, I've only seen Manhattan like 3 blocks from, the circumference from my apartment now for almost 2 months. So I don't know what downtown looks like, which is normally a bustling commercial hub, one of the great bustling commercial centers of the entire world. And it's a ghost town by all accounts. And I think when you see that, and you think about all of the shop staff, the sales assistants, the warehouse people who are associated with that, that you begin to realize the depth of what we're facing here.
I want to just, because I think the last time you were on the program, we talked about your book Crashed, how a decade of financial crises had changed the world. I mean, just so that people can grasp what is different between what happened in the fall, really, of 2008, I guess it was, and now, like, I mean, because we do have that split. Like at one point, I think obviously. And we should talk about. We'll talk about this in a moment. Like, I mean, it has to. I'm in the a similar boat. I'm at home. I'm working. I got to deal with my kids, but but in terms of from an economic standpoint, there's no. I don't. Maybe a little bit of advertising revenue, but there isn't been the shock that I know is going on, and. In the financial crisis, it was different because you had the stock market plummet. It didn't go back up. You also had sort of like a building, or maybe that's the wrong word, a degrading real estate market that just at one point like was sort of slowly degrading and then fell off a cliff, which would impact a wider range of people. I mean, are we sort of like, is this thing headed in sort of the opposite direction in terms of how things are happening?
No, I think we have to come back to the point that this is potentially much worse than 2007-8. In the end, in 2007-8, after all, it was that one sector, it was construction and real estate, that blew up a huge bubble supported by this extraordinary globalized system of real estate finance. The European banks were in on it as well. And when that began to unravel on both sides of the Atlantic, in the US, in Ireland, in Spain, the entire financial system came crashing down, and it's that which took the rest of the economy with it. This time round, it's really a full body check. The entire economy has shuddered to a standstill. Right? The turmoil in the financial markets in March was really the anticipation, because that's what financial markets do, of this full body check. The entire economy is going to stop. Right? Detroit will stop, but also all of the retail, all of the all of the restaurants, all of the travel business, it will all stop. I mean, my wife is a tour operator, and her business is basically non-existent for the rest of this year. We're not feeling this as acutely as we would because I've got a steady job with my university. But everyone that she works with across the entire world is basically breadless for the rest of this year, and they don't even know when it's coming back. They don't know when flights are going to resume. They don't know when hotels will operate. Glamorous hotels in the tourist centres of all of Europe have just shut their doors, and it's not clear when they ever reopen. Now, what that then causes all of those people to do, and they're only just in the process of doing it because this is only 3 or 4 weeks old, is they reevaluate all of their spending decisions. They themselves will not be going on holiday anytime soon. No one's buying a car. No one's buying a new computer. No one's really, upgrading their cell phone right now. So this will begin to ripple through the entire economy, and it's simply too soon. I mean, we've never had a shock as comprehensive as this delivered with this kind of intensity this quickly. So the numbers are only just beginning to catch up. The statistics don't add up. We know that, for instance, delinquency on consumer loans, car loans and stuff is incredibly closely correlated with unemployment numbers in the US. But the unemployment numbers have leapt from record lows to record highs in the space of 5 weeks. So it's going to be a while before those credit card delinquencies and auto loan delinquencies begin to pile up. When they do, that inflicts losses on the balance sheets of the banks. And we may 6 months to 12 months from now be dealing with very serious tension within the financial system. Remember, the real estate bust didn't start with Lehman in 2008 in September. It started really in the spring of 2007. So if we're on that kind of a clock, we could still be dealing with the financial fallout from this now deep inside the balance sheets of the mortgage lenders and the banks, next spring,
Right.
spring 2021, would not be an unreasonable moment to be expecting some of that to be coming down the pipe.
All right, I want to get to that in a moment because there's a question of, is there the same? I know, and I don't think there needs to be, for the devastation to be the same. But is there the same sort of like vulnerability in those financial markets that there were in 2007, which ultimately led to sort of like an exponential impact? But so what we're looking at is, we just had the earthquake, and it was in the middle of the Pacific, and then the tsunami comes.
Yeah.
And so do we have, like, is there, I mean, how do we assess that, and what will hit first? Like,
I think that's a great analogy. That's really a great analogy. We do indeed have the earthquake. We then have the tsunami, and then you've really got to hope that no one's built a nuclear reactor in the path of the tsunami, which is what happened with Japan, right, with Fukushima. That's really our question. It's like, which bits of the shoreline is this going to hit? And then when it hits, which pieces of fragile, potentially deadly economic and financial infrastructure in harm's way as that shock comes on shore? And that's what we're going to be probing all the way around the world, because another thing that's really unique about this is it's not just the tsunami in the Pacific. It's as though the entire globe could quake. I mean, it's quite even difficult to envision this, but that's essentially what's happened to humanity, right? 81% of the workforce, not of one country, but of the entire world, is operating under various types of lockdown or immediate post-lockdown right now. The ILO, the Global Labour Organization, says it's 2.7 billion people. It's unprecedented. So we don't know what it's like when everyone in the world simultaneously suffers this kind of a shock. Some people like you and me go on operating as normal, but people in my wife's business and people that she works with all over the world, but also street walkers in Delhi, people operating little grocery stores in Lagos in Nigeria, they've all simultaneously been hit. And we don't know how this organism reacts when you try and come back from that kind of a shock. Because normally we rely on the stronger bits pulling the weaker bits out and so on. Right now, it's not clear whether any bit of the global economy has basically retained its dynamism and that can pull us ashore from here. So it's really, it's extraordinarily dramatic in that sense, in its comprehensiveness. And the way it's affected literally every sector, every economy in the world simultaneously.
Okay, so we having established the sort of the scope of what we're looking at. Let's just, I mean, just to sort of tease this out in terms of like the depth in which it hits. Let's just pretend in a parallel universe that in a week, the scientists come out and say, like, this is really strange, but Donald Trump was right. It just, as soon as we got into the first week of May, the heat came and the whole thing disappeared. Everybody can go back out today, on May 15th, and we're fine. So, pick up the pieces and get back to work. I mean, presumably, if that happened, right, there'd be like a bit of there'd be some I don't know, some stuff to work out through the system, but more or less we would be fine, right? If that's the case, all right.
Unless you're one of the 26 million people who've lost their job already, so they would all they'd have to go back to the businesses that laid them off, and they'd have to hope. And that is what the data shows, that currently the vast majority of those layoffs are temporary. So
Right.
it implies that businesses that the people were laid off by are still there. The question really is, 2 or 3 months from now, will those businesses still be there, or will they be bankrupt? Will they have been wiped out in the meantime? If those people can go back to those businesses intact, then indeed, yes, one could imagine what the economists call a V-shaped recovery coming out of this. But it's really a matter of time. If this lasts into the summer, the lockdowns in the key economic centers of the US, and crucially, not only if the lockdowns are lifted, but if consumer and investor confidence doesn't return, because it's all very well for the governor to say it's all right for you to go out now, but we actually have to believe it's all right and that we're willing to take the risk that's involved in going out and inflict that risk on all our families, all the stuff that we now fully understand, right? we'll still not be going out and spending money the way we used to in restaurants. We still won't be going out to the mall because we'll have gotten used to getting things delivered and whatnot. So that shock will persist. And the time factor, I think, is absolutely crucial, and also the credibility of the return. If we're skeptical about how safe we actually are, if we're skeptical about the ability of the medical system to cope if we do get ill, and especially if we're hit by a second or third wave of our viral infection, then this changes confidence, and that changes, it may feel sort of a flimsy sort of argument, but there is nothing worse for an economy than a comprehensive loss of confidence on the part of consumers and investors. And you can see that, we'll be able to pick it up statistically in the way in which consumer behavior changes. So if consumption goes down, if saving goes up, sounds like a good thing to do from the point of view of an individual household, and it may very well be the safe thing to do, allows you to build wealth. But if that happens collectively across the entire economy, that doesn't work out, because what that will do is cut demand and send us into a downward spiral. And the real worry is that those forces of recession, if you like, might take over.
So, okay. And so just in my little scenario,